The Charlotte Ledger Podcast is a member of the Queen City Podcast Network.
Hey, it's Tony Mecia with the Charlotte Ledger, and you're listening to the Charlotte Ledger Podcast. You can find out more about the Charlotte Ledger at thecharlotteledger.com. We have a collection of what I think are excellent newsletters, all focused on Charlotte. Today, I'm talking with Adam Rhew, CEO of SouthPark Community Partners. It is an organization started in 2022 that aims to boost South Park's economic vitality and quality of life. It's funded by a new taxing district covering the commercial core of South Park, which is something that business and residential leaders in that area have been pushing for. We're going to talk today about South Park, its past, its present, and its future. In April 2024, Adam's organization released a vision plan, which had a lot of interesting ideas for shaping South Park in the coming years, and we're going to dive into that. I do want to note that SouthPark Community Partners is a sponsor of the Charlotte Ledger. It's one of a number of businesses and organizations that have sponsored our newsletters. And it also has sponsored our podcast, and it advertises on our events board, calling attention to, for example, its South Park After 5 concert series, which if you haven't been, is very pleasant. We at the Charlotte Ledger appreciate that because kind of like Adam's organization and a lot of organizations that we feature on the podcast, we can't do what we do without the support of the community, which allows us, in our case, to cover all of Charlotte, to hire reporters, to hire writers, and to have conversations like this one on the future of South Park, which is a topic that a lot of our readers and listeners want to know about. So Adam, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Tony.
So we'll get into the vision for South Park and the things that you're up to with SouthPark Community Partners in just a minute, but I'd like to start a little more personally. What do you remember growing up in Charlotte as it relates to your connection to South Park?
Well, I mean, South Park is home. I was raised in Beverly Woods. The house that I grew up in is the house that my grandparents raised my mom and her siblings in. My dad's parents' house was one street over. So it is a deeply personal place. And so much of my childhood and my friendships and really my formative early years were spent in this very specific part of Charlotte. We attended what was then Sharon United Methodist Church, which is now South Park Church. And, you know, I have lots of incredible memories of spending time in the South Park area with my family, whether that was going to breakfast at the original Pancake House or dinner at Harper's. I vividly remember the symphony concerts on what was then the front lawn of South Park Mall in the 90s. This area has always been special, and it's a real privilege now to get to work in this area, to be raising my family nearby, and for us to have the opportunity to try to continue to make this place special for the next generation.
Yeah, I want to get my South Park bona fides out there. So I moved to Charlotte in 1998. My wife and I, we had our wedding reception at what is now the Doubletree Suites right there. It's right next to Symphony Park, right by the mall. My wife, one of the places she lived growing up was the Colony Apartments. Obviously the old Colony Apartments, the one built in the early to mid 70s. And at that time, Phillips Place was just getting underway. I certainly remember going to Harper's, right there on the corner, of Fairview and Sharon. But it strikes me that even since that time, and probably since your time growing up, it's really changed a lot. I mean, it used to be when people said South Park, okay, you thought of the mall, and certainly the mall is a very large mall. But what have you seen about how South Park has evolved over the years?
Well, South Park has and is still in the middle of this evolution from a very traditionally suburban kind of place to a place that today is beginning to be more urban, more mixed use, more walkable. And it's, I think, still in the midst of this transformation. But, you mentioned Phillips Place. I think is a great example. When Phillips Place was built, it was so progressive to have that kind of walkable, mixed use shopping, dining, living, hotel kind of.
It was revolutionary at the time.
Yeah.
It was like, hey, there's this thing called a mixed use development. It's like, whoa, it blows my mind,
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's like, we forget that how revolutionary that concept was and how transformational the addition of Phillips Place was. to the South Park neighborhood. And I think there will be more moments like that, down the road, we'll look back and say, wow, that was a big moment for South Park. That's the evolution that we're on. And I think you see that with, the redevelopment of my childhood church, the Sheridan United Methodist site, going from the ski slope church with a huge surface parking lot that was episodically used. It was obviously busy on Sundays and then relatively quiet the rest of the week, to the Apex development, which is lively all the time. You've got Stake 48 that is busy, every night of the week. And that's a really interesting kind of transformation of that site, and I think is indicative of what we're seeing across South Park.
Yeah, and I would add, just to put it in context, it's not just South Park. I mean, this sort of transformation is going on all over the place. I mean, I don't know whether, the term you hear a lot is like edge cities. I don't know if I necessarily put South Park in that category, but you have, basically the idea is you have these areas that were traditionally suburban, thought of as very suburban, now basically taking a bunch of urban design elements. Like you think of Ballantyne, what they're doing with Ballantyne Reimagined. You think of the town of Matthews, you think of University City, you think of Steel Creek. All of these are places that are basically trying to take these ideas of urban design and put them into what were traditionally more suburban type of neighborhoods, right?
Yeah, I mean, and I think what you're seeing, and we're certainly seeing this in South Park, but in all of those places, is how do you continue to evolve and change? I think one of the great things about cities, whether you're talking about your traditional downtown, your suburban areas, the edge cities that you referenced, the great thing about cities is that they're never fully baked. They're never completely done. And so the great cities of the world are always changing and evolving and adapting. We obviously have lived through that in a big way with COVID, but you're seeing that happen in all of those places because great places continue to evolve and change, and that's part of what makes the work that we do so fun.
Right. So you started doing this a couple of years ago, and so you have a small team that's working to set a vision for South Park. Why? And I know you and I talked last year. I think we did a piece in the Ledger in which I think it was called something like "Waking Up Every Day Thinking of South Park" or something. I don't know
That's
whether
exactly
you
right.
coined that or whether it was Councilman Bakari. And he had a little bit of a strained metaphor about a skeleton, and you now have the brain, and there's the circulatory system. It didn't quite add up. But anyway, why is it important to have someone like you and your team waking up and thinking about South Park every day? What's the advantage to that?
Well, the advantage is that if you think about South Park, the 1 square mile area that we serve, there are 1,000 businesses in that district. There are lots of different property owners and managers, and everybody's thinking in terms of, their assets, their business, their employees. How do they get from their apartment to their favorite coffee shop? But the advantage of an organization like ours is that we get to think intentionally about the entire place. We are uniquely missioned to think cohesively about the 1 square mile and how it all works together. And so where, a lot of private sector entities, their interest sort of stops at the property line, and government inherently stops, at the border between the public realm and the private property line. We get to think about all of it and how it works together as a complete unit. And what we've found and what we've seen in other parts of Charlotte, in Uptown and South End at Center City Partners, University City Partners up near UNC Charlotte, and all across the country, is that the advantage is that to have an organization that stewards the place on behalf of its stakeholders, the people who use it, the people who care about it, the people who love it. That helps those places continue to thrive because there is a degree of intentionality, a degree of focus that you get from, to continue the expression, waking up every day, truly thinking about how do we make this place better? How do we raise the bar? And we really, our team and our staff and board really view it as a tremendous privilege and a big responsibility to do that on behalf of the people who use South Park every day.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about raising that bar. You all released this South Park Forward 2035 vision plan. It's 104 pages long, has a lot of ideas, a lot of impressive looking renderings. What's the thinking behind why South Park needs a vision plan?
Well, it's sort of back to this idea of thinking about the complete place. As a traditionally suburban submarket, South Park has developed in little pockets. And the metaphor that I tend to use is that we have great patches. What we need to do is stitch them together into a beautiful quilt. And there's no denying that if you think about the vibrancy at Phillips Place or at Apex or at specialty shops, all of these places are unique and interesting in and of themselves. But what South Park is missing is the connective tissue among all of them that starts to get them working as a complete unit rather than the individual parts. And so as we thought about our work, again, being a new organization, we felt like it was important to get all of our stakeholders aligned with what does the next decade of growth and development look like in South Park, recognizing that it's a submarket that is attractive to developers and a place that people will invest no matter what. So how do we capitalize on that opportunity and be able to both inspire that future investment and shape it to align with what the community wants South Park to be? Again, thinking about it as a complete place rather than, what happens just on this one parcel over here or that parcel over there.
Got it. A few of the themes that jumped out to me, reading through it, and I know this is sort of intentional, and you kind of highlight some of the major themes, but it seems like transportation was a big one, and then also sort of improving and making more spaces, more appealing spaces, different sites, different streets, sidewalks, parks, that sort of thing. Maybe we could kind of break those down and talk a little bit about, the sort of improving some of the spaces. That I know the term you sometimes hear is placemaking. For example, there was a rendering, I think, of Carnegie Boulevard, how it is now, a fairly ordinary street, sidewalks, buildings, some of them office buildings kind of set back. And then the vision there, I think, was, hey, we can make this a festival street. We can maybe close it. We could have a farmer's market. Can you talk a little bit about some of the ideas in the vision plan on how to improve some of the public spaces?
Yeah, so we spent a year developing this plan, and the first kind of big chunk of work that we did was a ton of listening to the community. So we did over 500 individual touch points with members of the community, and it was really clear what we heard was these consistent themes around the creation of vibrant public space paired with high quality programming. So it's not enough to just create a place where people could go. It is essential for us, and what we've heard from the community, it is essential for us to create vibrant places and give people a reason to go there. And so as you think about the example you mentioned, the Carnegie Boulevard Festival Street, it's adjacent to Symphony Park. One of the ideas in the vision plan is to reimagine Symphony Park as a space that is more flexible for much more frequent programming of sort of all shapes and sizes, everything from 20-person sunrise yoga to a farmer's market to a 3,000-person South Park After 5 concert, and to be able to have a space that can accommodate all of that different type of programming. But then to pair it with this festival street, which, as you described, is this enhanced streetscape, maybe some furniture, public art, interesting design, and the ability to episodically close that street so that, for example, if you were doing a farmer's market at Symphony Park, maybe you have some of the vendors in the street on a Saturday morning. Or if you've got a concert there, perhaps your food trucks get lined up in the street, or you do some type of community artwork or art activation there. So there are lots of different ways you could use the space, but the point is to give us more venues to bring people together, to create community. We heard that over and over from the people that we talked to as we worked on developing the plan, was this desire for creating community through events and experiences and that shared human connection that we have when we're in public space with our neighbors.
And it seems to me that the other part of that, the part that goes hand in hand with that, is this other component, is the transportation component, is the
Totally.
getting around. Because right now, most people think, like in most of Charlotte, the getting around, you need to have a car. And if you want to go from one place to the next, that means you're parking 3 times. So you have this idea in the vision plan that people, when they come to South Park, would it be possible to have them come to the area, park once, and have enough other options to get around so that they're not constantly driving as much? How important is that to this vision plan, and what does that look like?
It's essential to the vision plan. South Park, again, we're thinking just the true commercial core, that 1 square mile with the mall at the center. It is such an important economic engine for our community, and we need to do everything we can to continue to think creatively and innovatively about how we leverage this 1 square mile space. And so you've got 32,000 people who work here every day. You have 18 million non-work visits to that district every year. There are a lot of people moving in and out. And to your point, there are, I think, ways to think creatively about moving them around when they get here. The reality is that South Park is a relatively car-centric destination. Most people who arrive to South Park today will arrive in a car. When they get here, how do we empower new ways of moving around? And so some of the ideas that we have in the plan are for a free shuttle service, microtransit service that runs throughout South Park to facilitate that Park Once environment, to enable you to, say, come into South Park on a Saturday afternoon, park at Phillips Place, enjoy some shopping, maybe have a drink before dinner, and then hop in a shuttle and have it take you, say, to Bricktops at specialty shops without having to move your car, and perhaps picking up another couple of passengers along the way that are going to the same place, and making it easier for you to move around this 1 square mile. You mentioned the people who move their cars 2 and 3 times, and we see that a lot in South Park, where people who work here in particular will, come out of the parking garage and drive down to the pharmacy and pick up a prescription and drive back. And then later they'll go out for lunch and drive to go pick up a sandwich and drive back. And, the shuttle or a bike share program, and certainly enhanced pedestrian infrastructure, are all ways of empowering new ways of moving around that, A, start to take cars off the road, but B, start to create some energy and activity and vibrancy on the street, which is also really important as we think about South Park's livelihood and liveliness as we think through the next decade.
Yeah, I know a lot of people like to complain about the traffic, and sometimes the traffic around South Park, like in other places of Charlotte, it does back up. I think the newsflash is going to be it's not going to get any better necessarily overnight, certainly. And so it seems like if you can build in some alternative ways of, getting around, of taking those cars off the road, then that's a good thing.
One of the things we looked at when we were doing the analysis, the technical analysis in the plan, was traffic counts. And what we saw was that despite a decade of tremendous growth and development in South Park, vehicle volume remained relatively stable throughout South Park. There are a couple of places, a couple of intersections where you'll see sort of bigger upticks in vehicle count, but it's not even throughout South Park. And what that tells us is that there is an opportunity to intervene. And it's such a compact district that is an incredible advantage. The walk from my office at Capitol Towers over across to the other side of South Park to Little Mama's for lunch is actually a very easy walk, and a distance that if I were working in a traditional downtown, I would make 3 or 4 times a day and not think twice about it. So if we create the conditions, if we create the context for a safer, easier, more joyful walk, it will give people perhaps a different perspective on moving around South Park outside of their cars.
That's a good point. I'd never thought of that. Yeah, if you go to lunch uptown, you think nothing of walking 10 or 15 minutes. But I think in South Park, I don't even know that it occurs to people or to a lot of people.
That's exactly right.
It's just sort of ingrained, and maybe it's not the most welcoming also. So I think it's how can you change that mentality, and how can you how can you make it more inviting? I think your plan addresses some of that, right?
Yeah, it does. And I said those three words, easier, safer, and more joyful. And it has to be all three of those to encourage me to walk 10 to 15 minutes instead of hopping in my car and making a 2 to 3 minute drive. The pedestrian climate needs to be easier, safer, and more joyful. And so we're really thinking about how do we build the right infrastructure paired with amenities, again, paired with those high quality public spaces and programming that make a walk more interesting. If the walk is interesting, you may say, hey, what's that thing around the corner? I hear some music. Let me go walk 5 more minutes and see what's going on down there. It pulls you through the district in a way that, a more boring walk doesn't.
One of the things that's in the city of Charlotte's budget for 2024-25 is putting some money behind what are called mobility innovation districts. And it seems like some of those concepts are in your vision plan. What is a mobility innovation district, and what would that look like in South Park? Is it these things that we're talking about? Do we even what would it be? Is that something you all are interested in? How does that play out?
We're really interested in it, again, partly because of South Park's size, this 1 square mile, and because of the urban-suburban context. It's a little bit of a Goldilocks, if you think about it as a submarket, where you do have certain elements that are traditionally suburban, but then you have places like, again, a Phillips Place or an Apex that are much more analogous to an urban environment. And so the idea of a mobility innovation district, this is something that we're seeing across the country. There are places where we can think differently about transportation, and each one has its own context. What works in Denver or Washington, D.C. is not going to necessarily be appropriate for South Park. What it is at its core is a defined area where we as a community say, let's try some things. Let's experiment with some new technology, with some new programs, new strategies. Let's learn from it. So have a little bit of a startup mentality where we try things, we fail quickly, we learn from it, and then see what lessons can we apply to the rest of the city. And so in South Park, that looks like microtransit service for sure. The ability to run shuttle service for free in South Park could be something that absolutely could be applied in other parts of our community. And so we're really interested in that piece. It could be testing technology for autonomous vehicles down the road. It could be simply getting creative with the ways that organizations like ours communicate with the business community to incentivize employees to take the bus or to move around in different ways, right? So it's a mix of technology, but it's also, I think, it's an attitude of curiosity and learning that we really, I think, as an organization being 2 years old, have really tried to embrace it. How do we learn from things quickly and figure out how we can take those lessons and either apply them across South Park to different contexts or apply them citywide? We want to share what we learn here. Because South Park is, in some ways, this urban community surrounded by a suburban context, and we're not served by light rail, for example, we are going to have to think differently about moving people around. And that's a mix of modes. It's people walking and biking and taking free shuttles and driving in their cars. And so the idea of the Mobility Innovation District is to put all of those things in the soup and then figure out how we do something special and unique that ultimately makes it easier to move around.
Okay, so in this vision plan, there are a whole lot of ideas. I mean,
64 projects.
64. I didn't know. I knew it was more than 60. 64. And I know you've sort of described it as, it's not necessarily, okay, we will only succeed if we do these 64 things exactly as they're laid out. It's really more of sort of imagining what's possible while moving forward with some things that are actually tangible. But what has to happen in order for some of these ideas or most of these ideas or whole bunch of these ideas. What has to happen for it to move forward? Because it's not, like you said, it's not just, the government's not just going to come, the local government's not going to write a check. Private developers aren't necessarily just going to come in and do all these things. It involves a lot of property owners, a lot of stakeholders. So what has to happen to make progress on this?
Well, I think the first thing is for our organization to be the quarterback and to continue to, as we said earlier, get up every day and think about how you make progress against the vision. That is part of why vision plans in other parts of Charlotte and again in other parts of the country have been successful, is that there is sustained focus toward progress. It cannot be this thing that goes and sits on the shelf and we all look back and say, well, that was cute. But it's got to be something that, the plan truly, Tony, sits on my desk in front of me and stares me in the face every day. And as I come into the office, I ask myself, what are we doing today to make progress? So that's the first thing, is to continue to be focused every single day on putting points on the board. But the other thing, and this is what Charlotte does so well, is this idea of partnership. There are some ideas in the plan that SouthPark Community Partners can fully fund and execute, and all we need is for a private property owner to say, yes, you have permission to install public art on my property, or for the city to say, yes, we will work with you to permit a crosswalk in this location, and that's it. Then we move, we go. Clearly, the more ambitious projects, things like renovating Symphony Park or being able to innovate around mobility, are going to require public-private partnerships. And in some cases, that means money from everybody. In some cases, it means permission, opportunity to use land in different ways. And in some ways, again, it goes back to that mindset of being innovative and curious and being willing to try something new. And so we're going to go out and try to accomplish all 64 of these projects and programs over the next decade. Will some morph as Charlotte and SouthPark change over the next decade? Sure. But the intent is that this is our playbook that we're going to use to try to achieve as many of these projects as we can, as close to the vision as we can, because this is what the community has said it desires for SouthPark. So it's a lot of collaboration. Yes, it is money for sure. These projects do require $250 million in total to be able to complete, but it also requires, I think, a spirit of collaboration and innovation that Charlotte has proven really well over the years to be something that it does great.
And so if people want to get involved in this project, if they like some of the things that are in this plan, say residents or folks who live in Charlotte, what can they do to get in? Is there a way to get involved? Are there things that they can do to make it happen?
Well, one of the things that is really easy to do is to go to our website, which is southparkclt.org, and sign up for our email newsletter. We've got ways to kind of communicate with the community as we start to share updates about the vision plan. And as we start to go project by project, we're going to be asking for more feedback. We will want to know what the community wants for a particular public space. For example, if we start to program SouthPark more frequently, we want people's input to be able to create programming that is exciting for them. So we would really love for people to sign up and stay in touch with us that way, so that we can seek their input as we go project by project. You can find the full vision plan, all 64 projects, at southparkforward.com. And we're really excited to continue to engage the community as we move forward into the next decade.
Great. Well, thanks, Adam. That's all the questions I've got. Appreciate you joining me.
Tony, thanks for having me. This was a fun conversation.
Okay, that's a wrap. To our listeners, thank you for listening. Charlotte Ledger Podcast is produced by Lindsay Banks. This episode of the Charlotte Ledger Podcast was presented by SouthPark Community Partners, a nonprofit who leads SouthPark's advancement by driving economic vitality, creating memorable experiences, and ensuring an extraordinary quality of life.
QueenCityPodcastNetwork.com